Welcome to The Economy Magazine. I'm Benjamin Chong Alfares with the top reports from the global economy. Today's magazine: Franco-Chinese relations heat up during state visit, and Bhutan booms into the modern age of technology. First, the headlines. The International Monetary Fund will provide up to $18 billion to Ukraine as part of an economic reform program. The IMF agreement will also unlock aid from other donors, giving Ukraine a total of $27 billion over the next 2 years. But Ukraine will have to implement reforms before receiving the aid, including institutionalizing the flexible exchange rate regime and adopting reforms in the energy sector. Ukraine's central bank chief said the reforms would be painful, forcing the government to shift from populism to more pragmatic work.
The first point is a visa regime. Second point is diversification of gas supply. We are talking about gas supply from EU countries. It is technically possible to deliver at least 25 billion cubic meters of gas by our estimations, and $100 cheaper than supplies from Russia. Third point is the macro finance help. Our European partners decided to allocate 1.6 billion euro, that is $1.6 billion.
The standoff with Russia has intensified calls for Europe to develop its own shale industry. President Barack Obama urged European leaders to find ways to become less dependent on Russian energy. The shale industry could help wean the EU off Russian gas imports, which currently make up 30% of its gas needs. With 470 trillion cubic feet of potentially recoverable shale gas reserves, Europe has around 80% of the resources available in the US. But some of Europe's biggest potential gas producers, including France and Germany, have banned fracking for fear of potential water contamination. Australia's Woodside Petroleum may take a 25% stake in Israel's giant Leviathan gas field worth up to $2.7 billion. Woodside is set to sign a landmark deal for the stake in the 19 trillion cubic feet field. The liquefied natural gas specialist is a key player in Israel's bid to sell the supercooled gas to distant markets in Asia and South America. But differences over profit sharing threatened to slow plans for exports, and Israeli protesters complained the deal robs the Israeli people. As long as export taxes are low, all the royalties they promised us will turn out to be a joke, they said. The Federal Reserve rejected the capital plans of 5 large banks, including Citigroup, as part of its annual stress test. The test measures the strength of the U.S. financial system in a crisis scenario and governs the ability of banks to pay dividends and share buybacks. The Fed widened the scope of its study this year beyond the U.S. borders and examined 30 large banks. It rejected the capital plans of the U.S. units of HSBC, Royal Bank of Scotland, and Santander. The Fed cleared Bank of America and Goldman Sachs only after they agreed to lower buyback and dividend proposals. Bank of America agreed to pay $1.7 billion to bond insurer MBIA, settling a long-running legal battle. The settlement allows the Bank of America to remove one of the remaining large legal risks from the financial crisis. It resolves significant exposure and expensive litigation for Bank of America, while also giving MBIA a path forward. The settlement came on the same day that UBS agreed to pay $358 million to Assured Guarantee, settling claims it underwrote faulty residential mortgage-backed securities. Beijing and Paris signed scores of deals worth 18 billion euros on the second day of a lavish state visit by Chinese leader Xi Jinping. The contracts provide a much-needed breath of fresh air to President François Hollande, whose popularity suffered a blow in recent elections. More on this report by Daniel Roth and Anthony Lesmy.
Chinese President Xi Jinping did not arrive in France for his 3-day visit empty-handed. He came with his checkbook. A total of more than 18 billion euros worth of contracts were signed between the two countries during the visit. It's good news for France, which has a 26 billion euro trade deficit with China, 40% of France's global trade deficit.
During my visit, dozens of agreements and contracts were concluded between the two parties in fields as varied as civil and nuclear energy, aeronautics, automobile, energy, finance, agriculture, sustainable development, education, science and technology, culture, and on a social level.
One major symbol of the strategic partnership is Chinese automaker Dongfeng Motors' injection of 800 million euros into European car company Peugeot, representing a 14% stake in the company. The deal is a gateway for Europe into the Asian market. Still, there's plenty of room for growth. France has only a 1% market share in China versus 5% for Germany, and investments in France represent less than 1% of Chinese investment abroad. In short, France is a drop in the ocean of the Chinese economy, something French President François Hollande wants to remedy. One way this is happening is through a deal between Airbus Helicopter and their Chinese counterpart, Avich, to produce 1,000 helicopters worth 5.8 billion euro. While unemployment in France is rising again, these contracts provide a breath of fresh air to the French president.
At the moment when we must increase our competitiveness, at the moment when I'm launching the Responsibility Pact, it is very important that we demonstrate the values of our companies and France's potential, along with China, to have a partnership at this level.
These agreements are coming in an improved climate between Beijing and Paris. European wines will no longer be subject to tough investigations at Chinese ports, and the Chinese freeze on 27 orders of Airbus A330s over a row regarding the CO2 tax that China would not pay has been lifted.
We're joined now by financial analyst Lionel Friedfeld for a discussion on Sino-French trade. Lionel, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Benjamin.
So, what is the significance of this state visit between France and China?
It's huge because China is exporting $50 billion in 2013 to France, mostly of computer, electronics, toy, textile, and France is only exporting to China $20 billion, mostly in food and beverage, cheese, alcohol, cosmetics, and luxury item, which means that the trade deficit of France is $30 billion. And this visit in France is meant to rebalance the relationship, the commercial relationship in between China and France.
Because we're dealing with a trade deficit, what you just said, 26 billion?
$30 billion.
$30 billion,
yeah.
Right. Well, it's a fair amount of money, eh?
Exactly.
So what is the significance then? I mean, obviously for France, this is really important because there's all this Chinese money coming in, but why does it matter so much to China?
I think for both sides. China, it matters because China, you know, they're changing their economy. So you have the middle class doing more consumption and French products that are great. Today it's reserved to an elite of Chinese people. Yeah. Tomorrow will be widespread for China. But more importantly, for Chinese people, they're looking for technology. They're looking for industrial know-how. France is really strong in the agro business, in the security business, in the healthcare business, and in finance. You know, insurance and banks, and Chinese company would like to either do partnership or buy companies into France doing merger and acquisition.
Right, but in all fairness, really, I mean, China could get its know-how and innovation from a variety of different places. Does China really need France?
Yeah, because if we're speaking about the agro-business in terms of food, consumption, wine, security, also if we're speaking about nuclear facilities, you know, with the company Areva that had negotiation with the China state, putting waste, you know, like water, and to renew all the nuclear facilities. So yes, China needs France, but they also need it on the economic point of view, but also from a diplomatic point of view, because right. France is a permanent member at the United Nations and the Security Council, okay? Germany is not. China cannot do a deal with the US because the US, they're already speaking with Japan. They have a strong alliance. They cannot speak right. with Russia because right. Russia is very far. So France is interesting because it's a diplomatic power for China. Right. Also China is investing a lot of its money into Africa. Right. And Africa, you've got a lot of commodities, and France used to be running Africa. Obviously, some times ago.
There's a lot of ex-colonies, of course.
Exactly. So it's a win-win strategy for both country and France. Why they want China? Because China has a lot of cash to invest and to invest into company. And we saw that Dongfeng, a car manufacturer in China, just came into the equity of Peugeot Citroën in France, which is huge.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Lionel Friedfeld, financial analyst. Thanks for joining us and for giving us those insights.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cell phones and internet have tossed Bhutan, a remote Himalayan kingdom known as the last Shangri-La, directly into the modern age. As the country's new government views the technological revolution as a boon, the country is quickly making up for lost time. Here's the story.
Buddhist monks, monasteries, and smartphones. The Himalayan kingdom of Bhutan was the last country in the world to get television. That happened in 1999, but now the country is making up for lost time as it embraces technology to reach beyond the surrounding mountains.
We can make many friends from outside also, and just to communicate with them. Plus, we have our cousins in outside countries, like Nepal, and we can easily chat with them. But if we don't have internet facilities like Facebook, then we cannot communicate with them.
Bhutan is famed for its gross national happiness development model that takes into account criteria like nature and cultural conservation. But the country's prime minister says technology can help development.
There's a boom because why? The technology is not disruptive. It is good, and it can contribute to prosperity for Bhutan.
The change of lifestyle has coincided with a dramatic change to the political system. In 2005, the country's king ceded absolute power, and 2 democratic elections have since followed. Observers say the internet is already playing a crucial role.
80,000 Facebook users and increasing every day. That gives you an idea of how popular internet has become in such a short time. And a lot of, not only for meeting people, but it's being used like in other countries to create awareness, to campaign on certain issues, to influence the government.
About 3/4 of Bhutan's population of 750,000 now own a mobile telephone. A giant step for the land of the thunder dragon as it moves directly from feudalism to the modern age.
And now for a look at some more peculiar news collected especially for you from media outlets worldwide in Media Watch with Daniel Roth. Daniel Roth.
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. Thanks for joining us. So I understand that we're looking at news from Bloomberg in the Atlantic.
Yeah, okay, so it's a little convoluted. Yeah. It's a story in the Atlantic. Okay. About a story in the New York Times. Okay. About Bloomberg. Okay, Bloomberg, which does economics news, business news.
Right.
And so this is really Media Watch. We're really watching the media here.
Gee whiz.
But the story is essentially saying, it's in the New York Times, there's editors and journalists have been leaving Bloomberg.
Right.
Saying essentially that Bloomberg has been quashing stories that negatively reflect Chinese government.
Why would they do that?
Well, so there's 2 reasons that they talk about. One of them is that Bloomberg's primary source of funding are the trading terminals, and they want to be able to sell them, and their bottom line is selling these terminals. And journalism is something that people used to say, this is great. You're selling terminals. You're not selling advertisement.
Right.
So it frees you up to report much more about all kinds of different things. You don't have to bat advertisers.
Right. So when we're talking about negative stories, obviously we're not talking so much about financial stories. We're talking about probably stories that have more of a political bent to them. Correct?
Yeah. So last year, actually, Bloomberg was reporting on this like nobility, this like noble class in China, and they got in trouble for it.
Right.
And so with these more recent stories, they've been a little more careful. And so it's sorry, go ahead.
Would you presume that this kind of thing actually happens in different places? I mean, surely the nobility of the world, wherever they may be, would probably be somewhat peeved to find, stories written that are negative about them. Or is this really more a China situation?
Well, look, I think it's power in all places. It acts like this. In China, power seems to be more streamlined, though. It's much more authoritarian.
Right.
Looking to another place where power has been corrupted, there's a report come out. It's reported on in Deadspin about Qatar, who's going to host the 2022 World Cup. And the report begins with the following. Qatar is a country without conscience. And what they explain is that 1.4 million migrant workers are there.
Right.
Many of them are building World Cup facilities. And they're on track for 4,000 people to be dead by the time the World Cup takes place.
Unbelievable.
And so it's just this insane worker conditions that they've been complaining about. And Qatar even said that they've set up a body to review conditions.
Right.
Now people are saying the body's toothless. They're not actually checking anything, and if they are, they're not actually doing anything about it. But if you look, like 191 Nepalese workers died in 2013, 169 in 2012. Another 218 Indians died last year.
Isn't this part of like a wider sort of situation what we find in the Middle East in terms of like migrant workers or foreign workers that are basically, they have no rights whatsoever. They're essentially the downtrodden of the 21st century.
Yeah, and it's true in the Middle East, and it's true very much all over the world that migrant workers are dealing with these situations.
Right, well, on that very horrible note, thank you very much, Dan and Lot, for joining us. We have to end here. I'm Benjamin Chong Alfares. Please send us your comments and join us again tomorrow. Thank you.